Finance. She's presenting. You can see. Okay, thank you.
Call the meeting to order. Here.
Here.
Now you go ahead, Willie.
Okay, thank you. We have Elise Mern with Baird Public Finance with us to present about a referendum. If throughout this time, if you happen to be online and you have questions, you can put them in the chat. I will try to monitor those. Otherwise, you can unmute yourself at appropriate time and speak if you wish. And if you're in the room here, you can raise your hand and either come up to the speaker, or I will relay the question to Elise as we go through this. Good to go, Elise?
Good. Can you hear me
thank you.
okay?
Yeah, we can hear you. I can hear you fine. Are we good? Yep.
Okay. Fantastic. Thank you, everybody, for taking time to hear more about referendums. My name's Elise Mern with the Baird School Team. And as Willie mentioned, I do apologize. The virtual offers a lot of opportunities, but like if you have a question, the audio's not super clear. So if you just repeat it for me, that would be great. I would appreciate that so much. So on this slide here is the Baird K-12 school team. So the team on top helps school districts with capital referendum and debt issuance and long-term levy and capital planning. Whereas my team, the SBS team, we serve school districts primarily on the operations side. We work in school business offices all across the state, school districts as small as Washington Island to as large as Milwaukee Public Schools. And we see a lot of interesting things statewide, but the common thread amongst all of us that we see on our team is this operating referendum. So tonight's topic is very timely. I've been with Baird for 10 years working on behalf of school districts across the state. So how our team helps schools, we have a budget forecast model, a Baird video library, and then an analytics tool that allows districts to hopefully make data-driven decisions and cast forward when our crystal ball isn't working. So as of today, 291 school districts utilize one of our tools, with the most districts utilizing the budget forecast model. Approximately 289 school districts use the model. So you're in good hands because the model is it's another double check on the district's budget, and it helps districts prepare for future decision making and what ifs and unknowns. So Blackhawk has been utilizing the model for the last couple of years to kind of help plan for the future. So a brief agenda for tonight is to go over a little bit of a school finance 101, talk through the different types of referendums, then go into Blackhawk's specific ask and talk through some frequently asked questions. And there are many. 73 school districts are on the ballot this April, I believe. The DPI's website is undergoing some modifications, but that was our current count. So you're definitely not alone. So diving into the School Finance 101 part of tonight. So we're going to start by talking about revenue limits. And the reason we do that is because revenue limits are a statewide limiting factor in the amount of how much school districts can raise through state equalization aid and property taxes. So all school districts in the state are governed by revenue limits. And it's really the formula that you see on the screen here. So this formula was established back in 1993. Prior to revenue limits being put in place, school districts could essentially levy what they needed in order to operate. When revenue limits were established, essentially it limited the amount of revenue that school districts could raise based on this formula. So the first part of the formula is district membership, or FTE. So district membership is going to represent the number of resident students within the district, and it's calculated on a 3-year rolling average. That membership figure is then multiplied times a per pupil dollar amount. Now, that per pupil dollar amount was also established in 93 when revenue limits were put in place. And then the biennial budget or inflationary index, inflationary dollar amounts would be provided in order to increase that per pupil dollar amount. So from 93 to 2010, that per pupil dollar amount was indexed against inflation and would increase annually. After 2010-11, it was no longer indexed to inflation, and increases to that per pupil dollar amount were given typically via the biennial budget. So in one year, it'd be $179, and in most recent memory, it could be $325. So that's the recent example, because the 25-27 biennial budget increased that per pupil amount by $325 for a very long time. So that per pupil dollar amount is important because it's often cited as not keeping up with inflation. And even the $325 per pupil that has been granted in this latest budget is below the inflationary index for this time period. So that district membership times the per pupil dollar amount, plus any one-time or ongoing exemptions called recurring and non-recurring exemptions. Those values calculate the district's revenue limit authority. And we care so much about this formula because it's our largest source of operating revenue. So if there are trends that we can identify in any one of these bubbles, it will help us have an understanding of what is happening to the district's operating revenue. So before I move on to the first bubble, the district membership for Blackhawk, are there any questions on this slide?
No.
Okay, so the first bubble is related to FTE, or resident enrollment. This is what district uses to calculate that revenue limit authority. So in Blackhawk, over the last couple of years, the district has seen a loss of 31 FTE. This is not unique to Blackhawk. 75% of school districts in 25-26 saw declining enrollment. But over time, this trend is going to impact the district's ability to raise revenue. There are some parts of the formula that try to kind of slow the decline. It's called the declining enrollment exemption. But ultimately, if you lose enough students over a period of time, the loss of revenue would be inevitable, unless the district or the state increase those per pupil dollar amounts in a significant way. So I just included a little note on this slide to demonstrate that this number, this FTE figure shown on the slide, is not equal to the head count, which is what I affectionately refer to as butts in seats, or the number of students that you're educating on a daily basis. So we think about it like FTE helps us think about our revenues, while head count helps us think about our expenditures. How many students are we educating? How many teachers do we need to provide? Buses, etc. So the first bubble shows that Blackhawk has seen declining enrollment over the last 5 years. And then this slide here is meant to speak to that revenue per member dollar amount. So as I mentioned, in 93, districts were limited by the amount they could raise, and that amount was different for every school district across the state, and still is today. So every district's maximum revenue per member varies. The statewide average is $12,492. Blackhawks is $11,707. The district with the highest maximum revenue per member is $33,290. So if you just think about the fact that one district in the state has $22,000 more per member to spend in their operating budget than Blackhawk. And you can kind of see that there's fewer districts kind of more towards this top end, but more this is meant to demonstrate that Blackhawk is below the state average and would be considered really a low revenue district. Okay, so that per pupil dollar amount I mentioned, since really the 11-13 biennial budget really increased via the state biennial budget. This slide is meant to represent essentially the gap in funding had revenue limits kept pace with inflation. Okay, so the 11-13 biennial budget was essentially decoupled revenue limit increases from inflationary increases. And so really the blue line is the line that we want to pay attention to because it represents that over this period of time, the gap in funding for what school districts should have received has grown. So the green bars represent what would have been given if inflationary increases had been provided. And then the yellow represents what was actually provided. Okay, so notable are the years 22, 23, and 21 is low in the history of this graph. The reason for those for not providing increases in those years was cited as ESSER dollars. So COVID relief dollars during that period of time was meant to help districts offset their operating budgets. But the chart will indicate then that really just widened the gap because there was no base building revenue that districts were given during that period of time. It was one-time funding that really should have been used on one-time expense. And it didn't allow districts to meaningfully build their revenue limit authority. So this really just demonstrates that the gap in funding over this period of time has grown. So this next slide really speaks to districts often come to us and say, our team at Baird, and they ask, well, how much should we ask for? And when should we go? And what type should we go for? And so we often like to bring this kind of wheel to the board and admin team to say, okay, well, each of these buckets has an impact on when the district goes and how much the district needs to go for and what type of referendum a district might pursue. Okay, so each one of these can rise as a priority in a school district's in when and how a school district asks their operating question. Okay, we often point to fund balance and cash flow as a really important indicator for school districts' fiscal health. If school districts have a fund balance policy and they're not in compliance with it, going to referendum would help solve that issue. staffing is the largest operating expense in a school district's budget. So, how does the district want to pursue staffing? Small class sizes are touted as being highly advantageous, but they do cost, there is a cost to that. I mentioned the biennial budget before. That's a big indicator also. If, any changes happen at the state level, that could significantly impact, the amount that a district might go for. Even tonight, February 11th, right now, the state is considering a budget repair bill that would provide tax relief in 26-27 and special education funding increases in 26-27. That impacts the district's, their answer for next year. It impacts the tax estimates. It impacts what the surplus deficit might be. So I just include this wheel in the presentation to demonstrate that not only will the forecasted estimates change, but also that any one of these items, could change the tax impacts as well. We make a decision with the best information that we have at the time in order to plan for the future. So with that, I will share what is an output from our forecast model. And for those who are virtually on the call, it might be easy to read and see. So I apologize to those of you who are squinting at small numbers up on the side wall. But really what this projection is, it's how our forecast model works. We take the district's historical data and we reconcile it against the Department of Public Instruction for accuracy. The current year represents the district's budget as approved for 25-26. The forecasted years, so budget year 26-27 and beyond, are based off of assumptions that are known at the time. Okay, so in this case, the assumptions included in this forecast are slight increases to property values, conservative estimates for state equalization aid, declining enrollment is included as a base assumption, 3% for salary increases, 8% for health insurance, 5% for utilities and business insurances, and then a 40% special education reimbursement rate for 26-27 and into the future. So these are the assumptions that, as we know them now, that are really driving those surplus, those deficit figures that you're seeing in future years. Now, I do want to just put a disclaimer. You'll notice that in 26-27, the fund balance figure is in red, right? It's a negative number, which is not typically allowed and not common statewide. There are some districts who have gotten close. There are a handful of districts that I've worked with that did have a negative fund balance, but then were able to restore their fund balance after passing a successful operating referendum. So I share that because people say, well, what are you telling me? You're telling me that we're going to dissolve then in 26-27 because we have no fund balance? No, that's not what this is meant to suggest. It's really just meant to suggest that if the revenues don't increase and the expenditures don't decrease, then the district will need to pursue some short-term solutions before a longer-term solution is put in place for the 26-27 school year and beyond. So we share what the referendum is meant to address on some subsequent slides. But before I get there, are there any questions about the forecast?
No questions here, Elise.
Actually, I do have a question. Is that number on balance next year?
Do you hear that?
I did not hear it clearly. I heard the number for fund balance.
Dusty wanted to know what the negative number for next year would be if the referendum doesn't pass based on our predicted budget. That, is it negative 20 something?
Yeah, roughly negative 200,000, and that is if the district did nothing else to address that shortfall. So yes, it'd be like a negative 200,000. So the district would have to make up 600,000 between the deficit and then the number that you're going negative in order to kind of make it get back to black. Did I explain that okay?
Thanks.
Well, can you ask Elisa if she can share these with us so we can, share with Blackhawk Pride, put that information out on social media?
Yeah, at least we already have these, right? These slides.
Yes.
Yeah, so we have them already, Dee. Thank you.
So the district is considering it has a referendum on the ballot for April, this April. And we often get asked kind of the question of what would happen if the referendum fails. So based on the timing, school districts can ask up to 2 questions per calendar year. So if the district did not want to pursue additional reductions, then the district could return to referendum in the fall of 2026. So if coming to referendum in the fall of 2026, the district could still receive revenue for the 26-27 school year. Okay, so April isn't necessarily the last opportunity for the district to go to referendum, but it allows the district to make important decisions, especially about staffing, because of the statutory requirements for contracts. So it would allow the district to have important revenue to maintain operations before contract deadlines in April and May. So that is the benefit to going in April. I think it's a big benefit. You kind of know exactly what to expect then from a revenue perspective for 26-27. But if it were to fail in April, the district could return to referendum in the fall of 26. Now, there are cash flow considerations during that period of time that would have to be taken into account. So school districts receive revenues that school districts don't get a bi-monthly paycheck. They receive revenues in timing with state statutes, which are typically in specific months of the year, which means that paying our bills during certain times of the year is naturally very tight. Now, Blackhawk already proactively moved its annual meeting in order to alleviate some of those cash flow needs, because you need to have a budget in order to have kind of a cash flow dollar amount for the upcoming year. So that was very, very thoughtful, forward thinking on the district's part. But it will increase the district's interest cost over the time that it needs to take out that line of credit. And ultimately, the district needs to pay that line of credit back at some point. So the short-term borrowing is not unique to Blackhawk. It's common across the state of Wisconsin. But if you can't pay the short-term borrowing back, that is unique and typically is resolved by passing an operating referendum of some kind. So that's why I have those subsequent bullets about borrowing in order to operate. So a district could, the short-term borrowing piece of it, you could short-term borrow as early as July, but then you'd have to pay back, the previous year's short-term borrowing by November. So there's some constraints with the timing there. But then the district could also consider an operational loan, which is essentially a one-time influx of revenue in the year. You can pay it back over a longer period of time. The downside of that is that it puts burden on future operating budgets. Essentially, you get a what we would consider like a one-time shot in the arm, but then you have to pay interest on that loan over 10, 15 years. So that's going to draw dollars away from the classroom. And then, unless you can pay it off, is going to have to be a line item in the budget for a while. Additionally, as a result, the district could be at risk of a bond rating downgrade, which doesn't really matter if you're not like issuing debt anytime soon, but still a consideration. Then the next set of bullets is in response to a lot of what we'll often hear is that, well, if the referendum doesn't pass, then we'll just dissolve, or we're just going to consolidate with our neighbors. And that is not typically the solution. First, consolidation and dissolution take many years. It's not as if a district could dissolve or consolidate by the 26-27 school year. So there's very specific timelines for consolidation and dissolution. And then finances are a very important part of consolidation and dissolution, but things like, the board, the school district's mission, school board priorities, alignment of curriculum, those types of things are often policies. Those types of things are often areas where school districts are very different. And even though the finances might align and show that two districts are well matched, some of those other pieces that I described might be a conflict or a point of conflict. And that's not even to mention the discussion about mascots, because sometimes that's where the whole conversation falls apart, is if they can't agree on a mascot for the consolidated district. So the other idea that if districts consolidate or dissolve is that taxpayer wouldn't have to pay school taxes, and that's just not true. If under consolidation, districts can select essentially who their consolidation partner might be, and depending on who you partner with, your school taxes could go up or they could go down. It would depend. If under dissolution, the school boundary board, school district board of appeals appointed by the DPI redraws where the district boundaries are. So a portion of a district could go to another neighboring district, while the other could go to another neighboring district. So it's not guaranteed that the district stays intact. So that's why we share that consolidation and dissolution could be pursued down the road, certainly, but in the short term, it's not usually a short-term fix for districts. So any questions on this slide?
Yeah, we got one.
So considering referendum does not pass, you talked about short-term borrowing. How long can this district short-term borrow?
Did you hear that, Elise?
Yeah, so I think the question was, how long can a district short-term borrow?
Yes,
This district.
this district.
This district. Okay, so Blackhawk's annual meeting is in June this year. Is that correct, Willie?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so then after June,
I'm sorry, July.
is it
Second
July?
week in July. I'm sorry, Elise.
Okay. July. I knew it was early. So typical rules stipulate that under a normal short-term borrowing, so consider it like a line of credit at the bank, that typically it cannot be drawn on after June 30th of the current fiscal year. So what the school district has in place for 25-26, the district can no longer draw on that after June 30th. The district can then only establish a new line of credit for the 26-27 fiscal year after the annual meeting has occurred. So as early as July, Blackhawk can set up its new line of credit for 26-27. Come November, Blackhawk has to pay back the 25-26 line of credit. And, then the borrowing for the 26-27 school year is what it is. It's the same rules. So if the district failed in April, and so those are like the general rules for how districts utilize a cash flow borrowing throughout a typical school year. So for this year, because Blackhawk moved its annual meeting to July, really the same rules apply. So it need to be they can short-term borrow through November of what would be 2028 then. Yes, through November of 2028. During that period of time, though, the district needs to have enough revenues on hand to pay it back at some point. And that is dependent on whether the referendum passes or fails or other factors. So for those short-term instruments, the district would have to pay it back by November of 28. But if the district needed to do that operational loan that I described, that would be over a longer period of time. Those borrowings can be anywhere from 10 to 15 years. Did I answer your question exactly?
Yes, the question is, how long can we borrow our operational loan or short-term borrowing or whatever? How long borrow until we without passing referendum?
Oh, without passing a referendum and without like additional reductions on the expenditure side.
Without any additional reductions in the expenditure.
I would say probably 27, 28 would be potentially when the DPI would start asking the district's plan to kind of fix the financial situation. I've not seen it get for other districts who have been in this position. They passed the operating referendum and it didn't ever get to the point where like the DPI had to step in. I think the closest example right now is over in Houstonford. They say that if they are not going to pass, then they're going to dissolve and they're not even going to take out an operating loan. That was the plan of that specific district. So I would say the district has 1 to 2 years before needing to find a more permanent solution.
So Elise, what happens in that case, like you go back to Palmyra Eagle, and the dissolution board, whatever it's called, said that they couldn't dissolve. Now, fortunately for them, they ended up passing a referendum at that time. But what happens if you can't dissolve, you can't pass a referendum, you're just forced to cut? Or you don't know?
We haven't gotten to that. We have not gotten to that position yet. No district has been in that position, so I can't say with certainty, but I would assume that someone would need to come in and kind of help do a financial assessment, things like evaluating class sizes, student to teacher ratios, purchase service agreements, special education budget, and I don't even know who would do it necessarily. I mean, maybe Baird, but we've never done anything like that before. But the scenario that you're specifically describing, no past referendum, and then needing to borrow operationally. Yeah, 1 to 2 years if no additional expense reductions are made.
Anybody have a question? Okay. Okay, we're good.
Okay.
Yep, thank you.
So thinking positively that the referendum will pass. This is the scenario that demonstrates if the $800,000 recurring is successful in April. Oftentimes, most people want to know what's the impact to my taxes. And so at the bottom of the slide, you'll notice an average tax impact on a $100,000 home and then a $500,000 home. The reason we use the $100,000 multiplier is so that you can easily kind of plug and play. You know, if you have a $300,000 home, you can just multiply this 831 times 3. And that's kind of how we arrive at the calculation for the $500,000 home. So the estimate in the first year, based on current assumptions, is $831 on a $100,000 home. That's the school portion only. Okay, so
Elise, can we go back and Dusty had his question ready?
yes.
Right. And got one, doesn't it? So my understanding is that it's very difficult to get a district. Can you give a recent example of school in our situation, size or demographics, whatnot, that has been dissolved? Johnson?
No districts have dissolved in the state in the last 30 years.
Thank you.
So at least going back to that, yeah, thank you. When you say the 831, that's the total tax for the school on that $100,000 house. It's not the increase, correct?
Correct. Correct. That'd be tough to pass. So the 831 represents the total, not the increase. And then the next year, the 855 represents the total. So that's what you could expect to see on a $100,000 home for the school line item of your tax bill.
All right, I just wanted to clarify that because when I present, I often talk about the increase instead of total amount.
Yeah, so the increase is the difference between 831 and 607. So a $224 increase on a $100,000 home.
Thank you.
Okay. So that kind of covers the school finance 101 portion. So how did Blackhawk get or not what are the variables that kind of drive Blackhawk's current financial situation? And now we're going to shift over into kind of the referendum 101 portion, which goes into kind of like the types and what these referendums go towards and whatnot. So these are just some snippets from news articles across the state, right? So I mentioned before, Blackhawk is not alone, certainly. And it's increasingly the lever that school districts need to pull in order to balance budgets, in order to even have budgets that are operating at a deficit. So really, this is just kind of a snapshot statewide. And this is for not only referendums in order to operate, but also to improve the district's facilities. So this is an important distinction. School districts can pursue two different types of referendums. One type is a capital or a debt referendum, and the other is an operational referendum, and that goes towards the operations of the district. The capital referendum, you're going to issue capital debt, a large lump sum dollar amount that is then amortized over multiple years. And it goes towards new construction, typically, facilities, remodeling, larger ticket items in most cases. That type of referendum is restricted to those specific expenditures. Meanwhile, on the operational side, operational referendums are going to go towards keeping the lights on, paying salaries and benefits, curriculum, etc. So within the operational referendum, a district can pursue a recurring or a non-recurring referendum. Non-recurring is one time only, and then recurring is funds that are added to the district's base and carry forward. It is a longer term fix, but it's not permanent. Okay, so that 800,000 gets added to the district's base revenue limit authority. But as enrollment declines, that 800,000 next year might be, 792,000, and the following year might be 785,000. It is a longer term solution because the non-recurring is just one time only. But it's not going to fix forever. This is kind of a visual representation of what that recurring looks like. In Blackhawk's case, the 800,000 gets added in 26, 27, and then it will carry forward. Then visually non-recurring, this is the authority comes on in the years that it's authorized and then goes away once that authorization sunsets. This is a map of the state, districts who have asked an operational referendum since 2015. So the majority of the state, quite frankly. And then this next slide here is going to represent the districts who passed. Okay, so a lower percentage, right? But a good chunk of the state has asked, and a majority of the state has passed as well. But I included this visual. So in the last 10 years, 91 districts have successfully passed a recurring referendum. And then getting into Blackhawk's kind of specific numbers as it relates to how the referendum will impact taxes and how that compares to historical and looking ahead. So on this slide here is a snapshot of Blackhawk's historical mill rate over the last 10 years. The statewide average is $7. $7.09. So $1 roughly below the state average. And then this next slide here is a representation of the neighboring districts' mill rates. Blackhawk being the second to bottom. And then this is a summary of the referendums that Blackhawk has pursued as far back as the new DPI portal lets us go.
At least we have another question here.
Yes.
Elise, let's assume that the referendum has passed. And the state comes in with an emergency act funding, or they increase their funding, some miraculous reason they decide that they're going to increase funding, which is what they should. Does that mean that, the school has to levy that 800,000, or schools choose to levy less taxes over that time?
That's a great question. So I think what I heard you say was if the 800,000 referendum passes, but this, budget repair bill that's going through right now, apparently, comes to pass, and there's additional tax levy relief and dollars for special ed funding, such that maybe the surplus is greater than initially estimated or the like. The district does not have to levy the full 800,000. So that's just a decision that the board can make when it sets its levy, its final levy and budget in October. You'd want to weigh out, this biennial budget repair bill with the other considerations the district is kind of seeking to address. So like the fund balance, and then kind of the planning for programming looking ahead. So no, you don't have to levy the full 800,000. You could set a fund balance target or a fund balance target would be probably most pertinent. But yeah, so the short answer is no, you don't have to levy the full authority if it passes.
That question, just another step on that. If for some reason that all came to fruition, and let's say the board decided in the first year to only levy 600,000. In that second year, can then if they needed to, uh, up it to 700 or 750 or the full 800?
So essentially, in the year it's authorized, that 800,000 will show up as an exemption on your revenue limit, and then you decide whether you'll levy your full revenue limit, your full authorization in that year. The following year, the 800,000 isn't going to show up because it's part of your base, but you could decide to the short answer is yes, you could under levy. Instead of under levying 100,000, you could under levy by 50,000. You could under levy by 25,000. Iowa Grant is implementing a strategy like this. They asked for a large amount up front with the plan to kind of layer it in over a period of time. So I forget what the dollar amount was, but say it's 800,000. Oh, okay, perfect. So the idea was to kind of step into the full authority over a period of time as they were implementing, what they needed throughout that period. I've heard of another district utilizing that approach as well.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is Blackhawk's referendum history. Kind of just goes to show that the district has kind of like a less than 50% pass rate for referendums. But the last time the district passed an operating referendum was in 2007. So almost 20 years ago, that the district asked for taxpayer increases to operate. Now, there were debt referendums during that time that increased taxes as well, but those can only go towards what was written in the resolution at the time. Okay, so this $500,000 could only go towards the resolution for that 2018 referendum. Same with the 8.5, could only go towards the capital projects that were outlined. So none of these referendums that have passed in the last 5 years, a little more, 10 years, neither of those went towards operations. The last operating referendum that passed was just about 20 years ago. And then this is a snapshot of, again, some of those neighboring districts to show that this is not unique. This is not a Blackhawk specific issue. Many districts in the neighborhood have gone sometimes more than once to get a referendum passed. And even just looking at this list, I know of districts that are returning this April or this November. So just the theme of referendum kind of permeates the state. And I wish I had a more positive note to end on, but that kind of concludes the referendum portion. I know we talked through some of the FAQs kind of throughout the presentation, and those were included, but are there any other questions that I can help answer?
Not seeing any in the chat. I'm not seeing anybody with their hand up here, Elise. Anything else in somebody's top of mind? You have an expert up there that I would say that we're good, at least.
And if questions come up after the fact and you want to send them my way, my contact information is on the slide, and I'd be happy to pull any additional statewide data, pull any additional information that I can, or help provide details on the slides that I already presented. Just let me know.
Greatly appreciate it. We appreciate your time tonight. And I know you have another meeting coming up.
Yeah, this one's on consolidation. So that's where I'm on to next. Consolidation between Greenwood and Loyal. So
So I actually have another question.
Okay.
So
I love it.
how many other districts in the state right now are considering consolidation as a real option?
It's the question. Sorry,
you
Will,
hear?
can you repeat it for me?
How many other districts in the state are actually considering consolidation at this point?
That's a good question. At this point, those who have formally engaged in a fiscal analysis, Loyal and Greenwood, the most prominent. Houston'sford is currently considering consolidation with each of their neighbors. They're starting to see who's kind of their best partner. So I guess that's right now about 4. At a point in time in November, there were some consolidation incentive bills being circulated at the state level, offering actual real incentives for school districts to consider consolidation, like paying, providing grants, grant dollars. I think it was $25,000 for each district who would pursue a fiscal study just to determine if consolidation was even a remote possibility. And then there was another one that provided additional per pupil amounts for districts who consolidated. As far as I'm aware, those bills that were circulated in November have kind of, they don't have any more traction, is my understanding. But that's not to say that they couldn't. Gosh, like if not this year, when the most districts are considering it in the last 5 years, like, you know, this would be the year, in my personal opinion. But so far, it's quieted down on that front.
Yeah, as far as I heard, those bills died as well, for now anyway.
Yeah.
We have another question over here.
So in regards to that consolidation and about who is the best financial fit partner is, I'm assuming due diligence, you would hire an outside consultant more than likely. And then what's the average cost of that? 100,000 or more?
Yes. So if a district were to pursue consolidation with a neighboring district, one of the most important pieces is finding a willing partner. So even another district who would be in agreement to come to the table. That's usually the first best step. And then Baird provides fiscal analysis. Like we provide a levy and mill rate snapshot, which would just give an idea of like the tax estimate. And then we can provide a full comprehensive fiscal study. And that's $6,000 per district, because that takes like a comprehensive look at the district's budgets, finances, determines areas of savings. So that full fiscal study is $6,000 per district. And then the tax levy and mill rate analysis is $3,000.
Well, about 15,000.
3,000 per district.
Oh, 3,000. So 18,000 all in.
You wouldn't do both. You would probably choose one or the other. Like the tax one is a good one to determine who's like a good tax partner. Okay, so just in looking, like Darlington is the nearest district to you in mill rate, and Benton. But proximity wise, I'm not sure how they map up with you guys contiguously. Like who's the most near contiguous neighbor, and then what the tax rate might be as a result of that. So
Okay.
Thank you.
Dusty,
This is more of a follow-up question type comment. I'm just looking for clarification as far as my understanding of details in all of this. I think that the devil is in the details when it comes to consolidation. Say that a district has to be willing to accept this. There's a lot of things that have to happen in order for that to take place. One, they have to accept our debt, take our debt, right?
Yep.
And they have to be willing to take buildings and assets and do something with them. They have to be willing to take students, find space for those students, hire additional staff for those students, and all of those things that come along with that. So I'm looking for verification on that. That's correct.
Correct. So that $6,000 fiscal study that I described outlines each of those factors. So for Greenwood and Loyal, and Lucky in their case, neither of them have outstanding debt, but yes, all assets. Think things like pensions, long-term liabilities. Yes, class sizes, square footage. Do you even have the, either district have the square footage to facilitate a newly consolidated district? Student needs, in some cases, the districts might be able to find reductions just through, say one district has 2 sections of 15 kids. Another district has 2 sections of 15 kids. The combined district could have 3 sections of, 20 kids. So that might happen, but to your point, it may not, depending on the student needs and kind of like the makeup of the classrooms and what types of programming the districts want to offer. So there's absolutely so many more details than what I just described. Hopefully I didn't make it sound like it was easy or simple. It's very involved.
One other thing is transportation too. They have to transforms. So it's lots of
Curriculum, IT, software, infrastructure. You hit it all on the head. So currently, Greenwood and Loyal, they've engaged Myron to do a facility study of their 2 districts, and then they're going to make a recommendation about whether or not to close a building. And that will have its own implications as well.
thank you.
Anything else? I think we got them all at least.
If not, don't hesitate to reach out.
Okay. Well, hey, appreciate all your time and everything you shared with us, and best of luck for the rest of your presentations.
Thank you. Have a good night, everybody.
Night. Bye.